So that's the records. Now we switch over to DNA. And you can use DNA to confirm your research, to test hypotheses, and to break through brick walls in your family tree. And we can use this method by getting together a cluster of O'Malley matches. So, you've done a DNA test on Ancestry, for example, and you've got 10,000 matches. You're not going to be interested in every single one of them. You're going to be interested in the O'Malley ones, the ones that connect to you via your O'Malley ancestors. So what you can do is you can identify those matches that are relevant for your O'Malley line. And there's various ways that you can do this, because if you open your matches and you know that there's a cousin there that has already tested, then find that cousin and look at the matches you share with that cousin. Because any matches that you share with that cousin will go back to your O'Malley side of the family. If it's an O'Malley cousin, of course. If it's a Gleason cousin, it's going to come back to my family. But for an O'Malley cousin, it's going to go back on the O'Malley side. And then you can look at those shared matches and find out what matches you share with them. And in that way, you can just build this cluster of matches that are of probable relevance to the O'Malley side of your family. And the other thing that you can do is you can use YDNA. We'll talk a little bit about the DNA project later on. But this ties you to the O'Malley DNA project. And we have, for the Mayo O'Malleys of Group 3A, we have now 58 YDNA tested people in that particular group. And it's the largest group in the project. The second largest is the Limerick O'Malleys. But we have a huge number of O'Malley YDNA tested men in the project, and connecting with them might also connect you with an extensive pedigree that takes you back several generations. Mitochondrial DNA is the third type of DNA. It's only used really in some very specific situations, and we won't really be talking about that. But the whole idea is to target on your O'Malley ancestor. So, for example, there's you, and there's your known cousin, and you've tested at Ancestry, and instead of triangulating back to the tree on the far bank of the river, because that's what they've done in trigonometry for decades, for centuries, what you're doing is you're actually triangulating on the earliest known O'Malley ancestor that you share with your O'Malley cousin. And I did this a few years ago. I kind of realized that myself and 4 other descendants of my great-great-grandparents, Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan up here, they had done DNA testing. So I thought, I wonder if I can use that. So there's me down there, and there's my dad, and then he goes back up along the Spearin line to Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan, but then his first cousin, Cormac O'Carroll, also goes back to the same couple, and then we had various other people who tested, and they all went back to Patrick Spearin and Mary Morgan. And there's an example of the triangles that we form when we go back to that particular ancestral couple. And I just figured that if I looked at the matches that any two of the 5 of us, there's 5 of us in this group, if I looked at any matches that was shared between any 2 of us, it means that probably the DNA that we share with those matches came down to us on our side, either via Patrick Spearin's side of the family or via Mary Morgan's side of the family. So I did that exercise and compared my dad with Cormac, my dad with KS, my dad with EW, and put together what turned out to be 100 shared matches. And I wrote 100 individual emails to each one of those 100 matches. And I got a 50% response rate, which was pretty good. And that allowed me to break through not on the Spearin side of my family, but on the Morgan side of my family, which I wasn't expecting. I was interested in the Spearins, but I actually got Morgans. And it allowed me to add approximately 23 additional ancestors to my family tree, an additional 8 generations that took me back to the late 1500s in Limerick, and before that, back to Wales. Potentially. because we all know that genealogists make mistakes in their family tree, and there were probably some of these earlier ancestors are probably a bit iffy. So is all of this true? That was the question. And that's when I turned to DNA to try and confirm that this was true. Now, can I prove either question, any of these questions, with DNA? Because these Limerick Morgans were supposed to be related to the Morgans of Tredegar in Wales. And if that was the case, then I was related to Princess Diana, Humphrey Bogart, Julia Childs, Elizabeth Shue, Oliver Platt, all of these famous people. And I thought, really, this is where we're starting to enter the realm of fantasy. Could this possibly be true? Can I prove it with DNA? Well, autosomal DNA, which is the type of DNA you get with the ancestry test, MyHeritage, 23andMe, it'll take you back to about 1750. So this kind of cut off here, 1750. And prior to 1750, you really have to turn to Y-DNA to go back on that direct male line, whether it's O'Malley, or in this case, Morgan. So what I did was I tested a Morgan cousin of mine, and we had confirmed that connection through genealogy. And two Morgan cousins tested. They came back very close match. No differences at the 37 marker level of Y-DNA. Then, so that proved that we went back to 1774, that the genealogy was correct back to 1774. But there were two other people who tested and matched us, but they weren't in our tree, so they must be a generation beyond where we were able to get to ourselves. So they probably were from about 1732, and that moved it back to that particular time period. Then we found a tree on Ancestry that went back to this chap here, James Morgan, who was 1655. They tested on Y-DNA. It was an exact match, and it moved our genetic signature all the way back to the 1650s, again validating the documentary evidence in the family tree. So that was a very, very useful way of confirming that the genealogy was accurate and valid back to the middle of the 1600s. Now, we don't know if we go back to the Morgans of Tredegar. We don't know if I'm related to Princess Diana and Humphrey Bogart and Elizabeth Shue and all those people, because the Morgans of Tredegar had problems. And their biggest problem was this chap here, Sir Evan Frederick Morgan, who is the last of the Morgans. And the lesson here is never trust a man who walks around the garden with a blue macaw on his shoulder. And you can see from the wonderful expressions on the faces of those women looking at him, including Uncle Albert with that cigarette just poised on his lower lip, that they thought he was slightly odd. Well, he was very odd, and it's wonderful to have odd ancestors in your family tree, and I wouldn't mind having him in my family tree at all. But he was an occultist. He had seances at Tredegar House, and experienced occultists apparently ran screaming from the room. The Pope got hold of this information, and he went to live in the Vatican City for 1 month every year and advised the Pope on God knows what. And it's all on Wikipedia, and it just reads like fantasy, but it's all there for anyone to check. I have not put that link in your handout. So that's probably the end of my Morgans. It's also useful to mention that I did try tracing Sir Evan's line back to see if I could find somebody further up who had descendants further down. But can anyone spot the odd man out? That's right, it's Jane. Jane Morgan is this person here. She was a Morgan, but she married a Gould, but there weren't any Morgans left. So she was the last Morgan, but she didn't have Y-DNA. She married Sir Charles Gould, and he had to change his name by law to Morgan. And that way the Morgan name continued down that particular line, but it's associated now with Gould Y-DNA. And that's a wonderful example of how a DNA switch or a surname switch can happen on anybody's line. Not all of us own Tredegar House, but that gives you a nice example of how it's not always illegitimacy or infidelity or a secret adoption. It can be just the wife is of higher social status, so the husband changes the name to the wife's name. This is the kind of spreadsheet that I put together for creating these clusters of shared matches. On this side here, you have the company that your match tested with. You then have the matches themselves in bold with their approximate year of birth, and you can calculate that from any family tree that they have. Then the lines of ascent, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, with the DNA donor on top and the spouse below. That's the way I do it. Some ancestors are not confirmed yet, and they're in red or not known. And common ancestors are color-coded. So Lydia O'Malley here is in purple, Joseph O'Malley is in blue, Harriet Dunphy is in orange. So that is the color coding. I also have a column for the estimated relationship, which you can guess based on the amount of DNA that people share with each other. And also the column here shows that this particular match, Miles Davis, has tested both on Ancestry and MyHeritage, and so he serves as a bridging match between two separate companies. So you might have one group of O'Malley matches on Ancestry, another group of O'Malley matches on MyHeritage, but Miles Davis is in both groups, so you can merge the group from Ancestry with the group from MyHeritage, and that way you can actually see which groups and which websites are the relevant ones. The other way that you can bridge between different companies is by having a bridging ancestor. So if, say, Miles Davis, say Vivian Cleary on Ancestry goes back to Joseph O'Malley and Lydia Casey, and then on MyHeritage, Amazon 24 also goes back to the same couple, then you know that that is the bridging ancestor that also allows you to merge the group on Ancestry with the group on MyHeritage. So once you've got your cluster of O'Malley matches, how do you go about analysing them? And this brings us back to the records, because for those who only have partial family trees, and a lot of your matches will only have partial family trees, you have to build their family tree yourself. And that means going back to those records that we talked about earlier and building the tree back in time as far as you can, until you hit the earliest known ancestor in their family tree. The other thing that you can do is you can contact your matches, and you're looking for two things. You want more information about their family tree. You also want to ask them about any rare or unusual records that they have in their possession that aren't going to be in any library or archive or repository. They're going to be up in the attic, in the trunk, in the chest. And those might be very rare records, and that in fact is the next step, step 7. You can also torture the data, and this is what we were talking about by building that matrix of shared DNA. Imagine that all of their matches in the group are sitting around the table, and you ask them one by one, how much DNA do you share with everybody else around the table? Okay, next person. How much DNA do you share with everyone else around the table? You go around the table, and everybody gives you the amount of DNA that they share with everybody else around the table. You can put that into a neat little matrix. And that is a very useful way of just collating all of that information in the one place. And then there's a variety of tools that you can use to really torture the data. And I use the term torture the data because we all know if you torture the data long enough, it will confess. And that is the problem, is that your own biases and prejudices might go in to the analysis of the data that cause you to come to the wrong conclusion. And I've seen that a few times as well. DNA does not lie, but it sure as hell does mislead and confuse. So confusion can lead to misinterpretation. You can also look at things like triangulated segments, Banyan DNA, auto-kinship, auto-lineage. These are all tools that are available for analysing the data. Usually they do not give you a definitive answer. So you might throw hours of work behind this and then find that you simply don't have enough information or data to get the answer that you want. But what you're looking for is evidence that allows you to break through your brick wall. And this is where we come to step 7, using DNA to access rare and unusual records. This was Paul McLaughlin has this book from his great-grandfather, It Was News to Me, by Charles J. O'Malley, and it talks all about the Michigan O'Malleys from Mackinac Island. And that's exactly the book that you need to actually find out information about that family and how they connect up. But luckily, Paul has put a lot of this information into his own family tree, and a lot of the Michigan O'Malleys are in the O'Malley clan family tree on Ancestry. So you should consult that and see if you can find the information there that maybe allows you to link up your particular group of O'Malleys with the Michigan O'Malleys. The family Bible, letters in the attic, personal memoirs, these are all the type of information that you're not going to find in the library. You're not going to find in the archives. They are sitting in somebody's attic. They're sitting on somebody's bookshelf. But which match holds the key? And that's why it's important to write to all your matches, like I did with my Spearin and Morgan example. And I wrote to 100 individual people, and I got 49 no's. And then I got a 50th one that said, yes, we have Morgan ancestors, and I built their family tree and couldn't find the connection. And a second one, 2 years later, wrote back and said, yes, we've got Morgan connections. And that allowed me to actually break through that brick wall, find 23 additional ancestors on 8 additional generations. So miracles do happen. And how often do you need to be lucky? Just the once. But that's why you have to write out 100 emails. And that brings us to the Y-DNA and the O'Malley DNA project. And there are currently 7 distinct O'Malley genetic groups in the project. Group 1 is from Galway, has 5 members. Group 2 has been split into 6 subgroups, with the Limerick Group 2A being the largest one, 2B, 2C, 2D, all from the Limerick-Clare area. Then we have Group 3, which has Group 3A is the Mayo group, 58 members in that particular group. It's the largest one in the project, but there's various other smaller groups who all connect up generally in the Mayo area usually, or who are connected to the Mayo group by an ancestor who lived maybe 2,000 years ago rather than 10,000 years ago. But there's a variety of different subgroups. Some of them have only one person in them, but some of them are quite substantial, like the Kilmilkin group of Group 3G, and Group 3F is an interesting one because that needs to be reevaluated with recent evidence that has come through, which means that they're not related to each other as closely as we thought that they were. Group 4 has 3 people in it. We're not sure exactly where they're from. Group 5 has 4 people, probably from Galway originally. Group 6 probably from Galway, and Group 7 probably from Galway originally. But again, we're dealing with just 2 people, very small numbers, and really we need more testers to join these groups to actually come up with a idea of where they came from. And then there's 12 O'Malleys that are currently ungrouped, because they don't actually match anybody else in the project. But as soon as somebody joins the project that does match them, we'll take them out of the ungrouped, and those 2 people will now form a new genetic group within the project. This is how all the O'Malleys are related. So it's great to think that everyone who carries the O'Malley surname does indeed have a common ancestor. But you'd have to go back 48,000 years to actually find out who he was. And, we'll get there someday. For now, I think I'm just going to figure out how I'm related to Dennis O'Malley. So once I figure out that Dennis, then I might tackle this other job. Maybe we can do it together. So that's just gives you an idea of how, everybody is related to each other by virtue of the fact that we're human beings. And we all arose in Africa 250,000 years ago, and we wandered around Africa for about 200,000 years, and then a little group of us left Africa, went across Arabia, You go out into Arabia, turn left, and Ireland is there. Just keep going. You can't miss it. If you hit the Atlantic Ocean, you've gone too far. And it wasn't a case of you can't get there from here. You can, but there's an ice age in the way, and don't worry about it. You'll make it in the end. And that is really how we're all connected as Europeans. We are connected by an ancestor who lived about 48,000 years ago. But the group 3 O'Malleys go back to Nile of the Nine Hostages. So anyone who is in a group 3 group is going to be a relative of Nile of the Nine Hostages, semi-mythical figure. And anyone in the group 2s, there's 6 group 2s, they will be related to Brian Boru, first High King of Ireland, who was killed at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. So it's a great way of tying people to history. And Family Tree DNA, which hosts the Y-DNA project, have developed this Discover feature, which has a whole suite of tools which has proved very, very useful over the last few years in giving us much more accurate dates for the branching points in the various families. And the time tree is one useful tool. The scientific details is a useful tool looking at the age estimates. And we'll look at a few of those. So this is the time tree for group 3A. Now the time tree is just one of their versions of the tree of mankind. There's various versions. The group time tree is another one. But the time tree includes all known branches of the tree of mankind, of people who've done the big Y test. It doesn't include people who haven't done the big Y test. And this is where a lot of group 3A O'Malleys sit on FT86146. Probably Grace O'Malley's direct male ancestors sat either at or on one of the sub-branches below this. So anyone who connects to FT86146 is very close to Grace O'Malley's direct male line ancestors. And this is the type of age estimate that you get with this. The central estimate is 1238 for this particular branch, and there's a range, a 95% confidence interval, usually of about 200 years on either side. So you're looking at a 400-year time period in which it could be, with 95% confidence. So you have to take these confidence intervals with a huge pinch of salt as well. Usually that central estimate doesn't move around too much, but it will change as more data arrives and as more people join the database. Their data is going to make that central estimate shift a little bit, and because there's more data, those confidence intervals will probably come in, but they will never be anything less than plus or minus 50 years. So if you want to find the year your ancestor was born through DNA, it'll give you a central estimate, a central guess, and a century around that estimate, 50 years on either side. That's the best you can do. And that's just a function of the technology. So the time tree displays all branches of the tree of mankind, no surnames, earliest known ancestors, and only big Y test takers. The group time tree displays the branches with surnames and earliest known ancestors, which is what we want. We want to see those surnames, we want to see those ancestors, but it only does it for the branches of the people in that particular project on Family Tree DNA, and not all the surnames. So only those people in the project and those who have changed their default setting from private to public. So there's all of these little hurdles we have to overcome. And there's no tree that displays all the relevant information in one place. And in order for me to get the information and present it to you, I have to scrabble around on this web page and that web page and this web page and try and pull the whole thing together. And while I'm pulling everything together, I'm pulling my hair out as well. And that's why you see me here today. So very quickly running through the groups for group 3A as an example, because I've already done project updates for groups 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and they're on the blog. And they've gone up over the last week or so. But this would be group 3A, and you can see that it's including the name of the test taker, the surname, and the name of the earliest known ancestor. So in this first case here, it's Lawrence Maley, born in 1756. And that's the kind of information you get. This green bar here is the time period in which surnames were introduced to to Ireland. And that would be from 950 to 1150. Now, Brendan, if I'm running close to the time when we have to stop, if you can just let me know. I've got 10 minutes, grand. I'll run through this very quickly then. This is based on data from the O'Malley DNA project. It's the group time tree. There's 36 test takers in this particular portion of the group time tree. But if we switch to, let's say, there's the O'Malley one. It has 28 with that particular DNA signature. If we change to the M22 project, then the M22 project only has 8 test takers, and you can see them here. And it just goes to show that it's only a partial snapshot. It has a lot of the names and surnames and earliest known ancestors, but where are the rest of the 36 people we saw in the O'Malley DNA project? So this is why I have to scramble from various projects to try and pull everything together. Not all the relevant information is in one place. But this is useful because on this particular version of the group time tree, there is a Macpherson sitting amongst all these O'Malleys. And this is typically how a surname or DNA switch will look on the tree of mankind. You will see this particular Macpherson's probably looking around saying, oh, I wonder where my Macpherson cousins are. Why are they all O'Malleys? And it's probably because there has been a switch either in the surname or the DNA for some reason during the course of his particular lineage. So his lineage probably, if you traced it back, goes Macpherson, 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 O'Malley, 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 O'Malley. And the challenge is to find out why did that switch occur, and can you find out evidence for why it occurred? And that can be quite an exciting adventure. Now, there's various things that I do when I'm analyzing each Y-DNA group. I look for a dominant surname because some surnames might be more dominant in certain areas. So, for example, the name Malia might be particularly common in Achill, is Achill. So, if you are a Malia or have Malia ancestors, you should be looking to Achill for doing further research. Also, I'm looking to see how old is the group? How long has the group been carrying the O'Malley name? And is there a big gap between how long it's been carried and when the name would have arisen, about 1,000 years ago? And what happened during that intervening period? Were they always O'Malleys, or was there a surname switch? That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. What are the chances of that? Where is the group from? Various pieces of information give us clues, like the birth locations of the earliest known ancestors of everyone in the group can be very informative. Also, if you see who the genetic neighbours are sitting on adjacent branches, look at the surnames and then look where those surnames occur on surname distribution maps. So a name like Kilcoyne, for example, which I think is very common in... Yes, but I'm trying to think which group it is. There's one of the groups that's very common in. I think I have a slide anyway, but you'll see Kilcoyne is very Galway Mayo. And we're also looking to see if we can connect to some of the Irish medieval genealogies. And we've done that with the O'Malleys. And the genealogies aren't as correct as we'd like them to be. So that presents challenges. And we compare the clan-associated surname tree with the DNA-associated surname tree. That's the methodology that we use. I won't go into it. And we also should look at the branching structure within the group to see how are the Michigan O'Malleys related to the people on the adjacent branch, and can we figure it out? And it gives you an idea of which subgroup of O'Malleys you should be approaching for additional information. And like I say, is there any evidence of a surname or DNA switch? And again, looking at the neighbours on the time tree, looking at the STR matches. And I know that there are people here from group 4. Which is the Joyce group? John and James. What group number is that?
Group 5.
Is it group 5? Right, okay. So group 5, again, there's a lovely diagram where John and James's O'Malley family is sitting on the tree of mankind, surrounded by Joyces as far as the eye can see. So there has been, again, some sort of surname switch at that point in time. Maybe an O'Malley woman married a down on his luck Joyce, and he took her name because she was higher social status, and the children became O'Malley's, but still associated with Joyce Y DNA. So those are the kind of questions that I look at. We've talked about the McPherson of Group 3A already. Group 3A1, looking at this group, we find that that's where the green line is where surnames arose. They go back to about 1382, these two O'Malleys here. There's also another Malia who is not on the tree because he didn't do the Big Y test. But if we look at their origins, Clonbur in Galway is where one of them came from. We've known that they've carried the name since 1382. What happened between 1000 AD and 1382? We don't actually know at this point in time. So we have about 380 years that we still have to account for. Group 3B, we have these two Maylies up here, and they're surrounded by Lamont, Courtney, Kerr, McPherson. That's when surnames arose. So they've probably been carrying the Mailey surname for about the last 1,000 years. So we might be looking at the DNA signature of the progenitor, the originator of the O'Malley surname in this particular group. But look at the surnames. Mailey, Melly, and there's a Mellon down here as well. So this particular group has some very unusual variants of the surname O'Malley, and it may be that they were never O'Malleys to start with. They were Mellons or Mellies, and it evolved over the course of time to become O'Malley, but as a variant rather than a surname switch. Group 3C, we have the Malloy up here, and that's when surnames arose, 950 to 1150. And we only have this one person in the group. We don't know for how long he's been carrying the Melly surname or Melloy surname, but he might be Scots-Irish. There is Kilcoyne here, so he could be Galway Mayo, and there's the surname distribution map for Kilcoyne. We can look at Group 3D, and Group 3D is this Malloy here. He's in the O'Malley DNA project, but in fact he's surrounded by Molloys, and he belongs to the Molloy group who come from the Molloys of Fircal in Offaly, and they would be connected to one of the ancient Irish medieval genealogies. I haven't assessed that yet, but the admins in the Molloy group probably have. Now, groups 3E and 3F are again single individuals, and look where surnames arose. They arose here. The common ancestor for all of these groups is way before surnames. They don't belong in the same group. I'm going to have to take these 3F people and I'm going to have to regroup them into 3F. We already have 3G, so it'll have to be 3H and 3I. So watch out for two more genetic groups in the very near future. And then lastly, the 3G, the O'Malleys of Kilmilkin, or at least one group of O'Malleys from Kilmilkin. They've been carrying the name since 1505, but there's a long distance between 1505 and when the surnames arose 1,000 years ago. I don't know if there has been a surname switch prior to 1500. After 1500, there are 3 Burkes sitting here who have a common ancestor about 1600, but they're surrounded by O'Malleys. So I think somewhere in this group, the O'Malley's name became a Burke, but these 3 Burkes were originally O'Malleys on their direct male line. A quick update on Finding Grace. Not much has happened in the recent times. From the 2023 gathering, we found that, in fact, the Group 1 O'Malleys of Ross House were closely related to the Ballyburke, much more closely than we had anticipated. The only thing that really has changed are these dates here, 1264, 1426 and 1670. They have changed slightly by less than 50 years. That's the only change. And let me go to the group time tree. This was 2023, and this is what it looked like then. It looks exactly the same except for the dates. If you look at the dates, I'm going to change them to red dates to indicate the change. Again, very slight changes. We still are thinking that Dermot, who is Grace's great-grandfather, probably carried this DNA signature up here, FTA 85293. what has happened since the last gathering was the French connection. Now we know that the 1500s was a time of trade, war and flight, and Grace O'Malley and her counterpart Elizabeth I lived through that time period. These are Irish-French trade routes in the 1500s as designed by artificial intelligence. And you can see that Ireland had a busy trade from Galway, which used to be where Cork is now, and traded with La Rochelle and Bordeaux in France, which back then was France, but it's now England. So thank you, AI. You have adequately identified how artificial your intelligence really is. But this trade that Grace O'Malley would have been involved with, and the whole O'Malley clan, fish, hides, wool and livestock from Ireland in exchange for wine, textiles, salt, which was a big trade from France, very important for preserving fish, and maybe luxury goods from France. But then the 1500s, we had the Desmond Rebellions, the Spanish Armada, the 9 Years' Wars, the flight of the Earls. A lot of Gaelic nobility was disintegrated. A lot of them fled to France and to Spain, to Portugal, to Irish communities. And one of the things that we are looking out for is French O'Malleys, Spanish O'Malleys. And one of them came along, and we have a Gilbert Malley up here. You won't see it very well. And he apparently was an Irish exile. And he was born about 1585, which was during the lifetime of Grace O'Malley, the Pirate Queen. So he could easily have been one of her cousins, or one of the children or grandchildren of one of her cousins. And Brendan, you've done some research. Would you like to fill us in briefly on... Do you want to come up here actually and speak into the microphone and tell us briefly what you found out with these French people?
Yeah, Morris was contacted by a lady from France who was interested in this and inquiring, and she came up with this link to this Gilbert Mallet. And I went through some French DNA sites, and there are lots and lots of descendants and others going back to that sort of time and down to the modern day. So I was trying to find a male living O'Malley who we could get to do a DNA test and check. I found some, but I wasn't, they were on trees compiled by other people who didn't know them, so I couldn't get the introduction. I found one or two that I could email, but didn't get answers. I got distracted into something else a while ago, so I need to go back to this and follow up the rest of it. But I discovered from Morris only yesterday that doing DNA tests in France is illegal, which is a rather strange situation. So whether we can find a way to get a DNA test smuggled out of France and do it over here, we'll have to see if we can find someone. But it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress. And stay where you are, because there's another slide coming up here in a second. I checked on ChatGPT, and ChatGPT says go to Belgium, get the test sent to Belgium, and then it's legal to actually post it into France. We're not allowed to advertise in France or promote it in France, but we can send the kit to Belgium and then have it posted into France, send it back to Belgium, and then send it off to the lab in Texas. So that's hopefully what we'll be able to do at some point in time. So several male lines have been identified so far. The last few slides, another thing that Brendan's been working on are the O'Malleys of Hazel Rock Lodge, who reportedly go back to Owen O'Malley of Burrishoole, 1650. And we have 2 samples from his descendants so far, and they sit where we think they should sit. It would be great to get a third descendant of Owen of Burrishoole. And this chap here, Michael O'Malley, he died at Hazel Rock Lodge, which is not too far from here. And he has had a variety of different descendants. We've managed to, Brendan, actually I'll pass it over to you, and then you can talk about King O'Malley.
Yeah. Well, over here on the wall is a pedigree compiled by Sir Samuel O'Malley, or compiled for Sir Samuel O'Malley in the 1830s. and there's a note on it which actually was added, I think, sometime later, but it refers to a Michael O'Malley of Hazel Rock, which is this, not Hazel Rock Lodge, obviously, but Hazel Rock, which I guess is the area around it. But his descendants, this fellow here, James Austin O'Malley Sr., this guy, he was one of 3 brothers who emigrated to Connecticut, and one of them, Walter, in New Haven, became the largest retailer in all of New England. He had a very large department store, became very wealthy. His brother James had a son, James Jr., who got into trouble. He and Walter's son were accused of murder. There was a very controversial trial. They were acquitted. James went on and moved across country. I guess he decided Connecticut was too hot to stay in. And Brian O'Malley, who was here at a gathering two or 3 years ago from Australia, has written a book where he asserts that James changed his identity and became King O'Malley, who was a well-known Australian politician and quite a colourful character. He's done a lot of research, and it's quite a convincing book. But it would be marvellous if we had some way of confirming that thesis, that idea, by DNA. So again, that's something we're pursuing. We have found one of the Connecticut O'Malleys who's taken a DNA test. We don't have the results yet, but if we can get that, then potentially we have DNA to compare against. If we could get something of King O'Malley's DNA, but Morris has a theory as to one way that we could possibly do that. King O'Malley had no children, so we'll have to see. But these are the kind of things that Morris and I divert ourselves with in trying to extend the tree.
Absolutely.
Back to you, sir.
Well, they sadly keep us off the street, don't they? So if we did get, we were waiting for the results of a potential cousin of this King O'Malley, and because he was so controversial, and because he was a politician, he probably wrote a lot of letters. Now, hopefully he didn't get his secretary to lick the stamp, because that's not going to help us at all. But if he licked his own stamps, which any decent Irishman should do, then there's a chance that we can actually peel back the paper, get at the stamp, and the DNA is in the gum of the stamp. And using that technique, people like Anthea Ring, who was found in a blackberry bush as a baby, abandoned, saved, she actually was able to, first of all, trace her mother, who had passed away some years before, and they managed to narrow down the father to one of 6 brothers. 2 descendants of 2 of the brothers tested and ruled out 2 of those brothers. That left 4, but none of them had any children, but one of them had written letters, and they managed to get one of those letters, take away the inside of the envelope, get at the gum of the stamp, and after the 3rd attempt, they were able to confirm that the man who had licked the stamp was the father of Anthea Ring. And there is a company in Australia called To the Letter. So King O'Malley's letters will be in Australia. He was an Australian politician, and if we do get the DNA, we will be able to hopefully find a letter. If we get the DNA from his cousin, we'll be able to get a letter and compare it to the DNA on the back of the stamp, hopefully. And by the time we get around to doing that, the technology should be advanced enough that it comes down in price. You can see the prices there. So you have to go through all of those stages, and it's going to cost you $2,000 to actually get that type of analysis done. But as with technology, those prices will probably come down over time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of this so-called workshop, where I talk for most of the time. Thank you very much for your attention.